Hello there friends and welcome! Today we have a very different type of guide. We will be covering Solasta, Crown of the Magister, another cRPG, this time focused into Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition mechanics, which can also help you get ready for Baldur's Gate 3 coming very soon, also 5th edition. Solasta is a pretty fun game, reminds me a lot of Icewind Dale, and gameplay-wise it does offer some unique mechanics that no other cRPG has done before, such as verticality in maps and also the ability to fly even. Anyways, for this guide I want to first cover how the most important mechanics behind the game work, and also some very important character creation tips for any character and build, together with useful strategies too, as to help you prepare for the first time you play this game, but even if you are already an old timer, you might learn something new as well. So let's get started, shall we? First with character creation tips that will define your build. Now when it comes to race and the best races, well, I'm afraid the golden age of humanity is long gone in Solasta or 5th edition. As a matter of fact, humans are probably the weakest race in Solasta, that's right, they went from the best before to the weakest. They don't get a +2 to any ability score, which is really annoying because they can't start with a 20. And ability point increases are very rare in Solasta. But most importantly, they lack the dark vision ability. In Solasta, if you're attacking an enemy that's unlit, that is not near any light source, which is very common in this game, you will attack at disadvantage, which means, well, your chances of hitting the enemy will be much lower. So for a ranged character, definitely don't go with human. I suppose Dragonborns also lack dark vision, but all the other races, they pretty much all have it. Now when it comes to the best race, it's definitely High Elf. As Galadriel said, I will go into the west and diminish, well I don't think so. The Elven Golden Age is here, it's all about Elven supremacy in Solasta. First, Elves have +2 to their dexterity, which is huge, as I will soon explain. Dexterity is the best stat in the game by far. They also have the classic Elven weapon proficiencies for free, which covers a lot of nice weapons like longbow, shortbow and longsword. Most importantly, the Sylvan Elf has the highest movement of all races and characters in the game at 7 instead of 6. Movement matters a lot in Solasta because unlike Pathfinder and 3rd edition D&D, movement is not tied to your main attack or spellcasting actions. You can move as much as you want, while still retaining the ability to attack all of your hits. You can even move a beat attack, then move again and attack another enemy. There's really no limit other than how many cells you can move per round. And of course, the higher your movement, the easier it is to reach the enemies, escape from them or get into advantageous areas and choke points. Sylvan Elf also has a +1 to their wisdom together with +2 to dexterity, which is amazing for, well, any class that's based on wisdom like cleric. So honestly, for most characters and classes in the game, Elf is by far the way to go. Now there's also something to be said about Halfling, because they also have a +2 to dexterity and +1 to constitution even, or +1 to charisma. Halflings have the unique lucky skill, which means whenever they roll a 1 on an attack roll, ability check or saving throw, you'll get to reroll it and use the new roll. I don't think it needs any saying if you've ever played any other Dungeons & Dragons game before. Missing because you rolled a 1, which is an automatic failure, is extremely annoying, and you will roll a lot of 1s in the game because of how many times you are making actions. Halflings at least can avoid that. They do have less movement than the norm though, 5 instead of 6, or 7 if you went with Sylvan Elf. Now for some other classes, for example Warlock and Sorcerer, which are based on charisma, I would much rather go with Tiefling and Half-Elf because they can start with a 20 charisma, which does matter a lot in this game. Ideally Half-Elf, because they also get a +1 to 2 other ability scores, usually dexterity and constitution, which makes it far easier for them to start with many high scores at level 1. But Tieflings can work too, and they are resistant to fire by default, which is nice. Besides that, just gnomes if you want to go with wizards because they have the highest starting intelligence. But overall, as I said, Sylvan Elf is pretty much the best choice for almost all classes. Now when it comes to classes and the best classes, I have already guides prepared for each class individually, right, with builds and so on, and the main mechanics. So for now, let's just keep it simple. To put it simply, Cleric, especially Battle Cleric, Warlock, Sorcerer, Druid and Monk are definitely top tier choices. Rogues are at the weakest I think in Solasta out of all of the Dungeons & Dragons editions, because their main feature sneak attack, for some really strange reason they decided to limit it to just once per round, so it doesn't matter if you have multiple attacks, sneak attack can only proc once. Rather disappointing. Warlocks are very versatile and the king of both single target and area of effect damage too, while sorcerers have the easiest way when it comes to making enemies fail their saving throws, especially useful for the higher difficulties like Cataclysm, where enemies do get very high bonuses to their saves. Druid, just like Warlock, has the best area of effect spell in the game, together with some nice utility, damage, buffs, and even healing. Meanwhile, Cleric and Battle Cleric, it's probably the most busted class in the whole game. It can do everything: attack, cast spells, buff, heal, debuff. It really does everything. Something unique about Battle Cleric is that they even gain an extra attack per round at around level 8. Which does matter in Solasta because unlike 3rd edition and Pathfinder, not all classes actually get attack increases. For example, just like Baldur's Gate and Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, Druid, the normal Cleric, Wizard, Warlock, Sorcerer, you are stuck with one melee or ranged attack for the entire game. Battle Clerics get 2, together with full spellcasting and the other bonuses I said, while other classes like Barbarian, Paladin and Fighter do get extra attacks as they level up at level 5+. Now when it comes to background, there are 2 backgrounds that stand out as the best. The first is Lawkeeper, because it provides you with martial weapons proficiency, meaning your character can equip pretty much all weapons. There aren't really exotic weapons in Solasta, it's just martials and simple. Of course, if your class already has martial weapons like Paladin, Fighter, well, it won't matter, but for the ones that don't, like non-battle clerics, Warlock, Wizard, and so on, this can help, if you also want to attack with your character. The second best pick is Sellsword, because it provides you with medium armor proficiency for free. Armor is quite good in Solasta because unlike Pathfinder or 3rd edition, it does not interfere with spellcasting at all, so if you start with, let's say, a Wizard, then pick the Sellsword background, you'll now be able to equip medium armor for free for even higher AC. Other than that, backgrounds will be mostly to get you proficiency in the crafting tools. For example, Academic has the Enchanter ability, which lets you become proficient with the Mana Kellan Rosary necessary to enchant all items, while Wanderer, for example, has proficiency in Smith tools and the Herbalism kit, but it's mostly Academic because usually you just want to enchant items. Now let's cover strategies for the best stat spread selection. I'll be blunt, you can go with either dice rolls or point buy, but point buy is vastly inferior, I'm afraid, because you can't really get multiple high stats with it. For example, I can only start at the max with 16 in Wisdom, 17 in Dexterity and 15 Constitution, while the other stats are all 8, quite poor. On the other hand, to dice rolling, well, it's only limited by your patience, right, because you can get multiple high rolls, which does matter a lot for the higher difficulties. After all, you want all the power you can get as earliest too. Ideally, 118 and 117 is enough for most purposes, so you would have Dexterity at 18 or 20 if you have a bonus, like from Elf, then 17 to your second important stat, and lastly, you probably want Constitution too, so ideally you would also have a 14, which I didn't get this time. But just reroll a bit again and there we go, we now have 18, 17 and 16 for a very optimal stat spread. Of course you can roll for higher scores, it's just gonna take a long time. 118 and 117 happens quite a lot. Now the most important stat in the game is without a doubt Dexterity, because it does pretty much everything. First, by default, Dexterity will increase both your attack rolls and also damage when it comes to ranged weapons. So my longbow, as a cleric with 20 dexterity, would have a +5 to hit and also +5 extra damage added. Second, it also does the same for finessable weapons, for example, rapiers, which have very high 1d8 base damage. This way even my level 1 character could be quite powerful at both melee and ranged weapons, by combining a finessable weapon, like a rapier, and a ranged weapon, like, well, any one, but most importantly longbows and heavy crossbows. Second, Dexterity also increases your initiative score. Initiative matters a lot in Solasta as a turn-based game. If you get to act before the enemy, well, chances are you'll most likely win the battle because of the huge advantage. Do note that enemies in Solasta, even on the highest difficulty, they don't have any bonus whatsoever to their initiative, right? It's just a +0. Third, dexterity is directly tied to your armor class. Solasta is a low numbers game. Your characters won't really achieve super high scores. If you start with 20 dexterity and just have, let's say, a studded armor, you'll already achieve enough AC to avoid 40 to 50% of attacks, or at the very least 30 to 40 even on the hardest difficulty, Cataclysm. The benefits don't stop there because dexterity is also directly tied to avoiding spell damage. After all, most spells like Fireball allow a reflex, well, not reflex anymore, it's actually a dexterity based saving throw for half damage. And it even increases your stealth too, plus the ability to disarm traps. Like I said, it's super stacked, it does everything you could possibly want. Tanking, attacking, avoiding damage. Anyways. It's also important to have a decent constitution score for your characters. Usually 16 is enough, or 14 at the very least. Any character, right? Because the more hit points you have, well, the more mistakes you can make and more hits you can take. Depending on your class, let's say a spellcaster like a cleric or a warlock, you'll also want 18 in your main casting stat, like wisdom here. Strength, I'm afraid is rather useless because, like I said, dexterity already works for finessable weapons. You don't even need a weapon finesse feat, which doesn't exist. And it doesn't do anywhere as much as dexterity. Ideally, you wouldn't start with a very low score like 9, because it does increase your carrying capacity, and you don't want your characters getting encumbered. As far as intelligence and charisma, you can freely dump them, unless you are a wizard or a warlock or sorcerer. Intelligence can really only help when it comes to crafting, enchanting items. Now for skills, this is going to depend on your character's class and background, but ideally, having a character with high charisma can be nice for the dialogue skills, although they don't really matter as much. They can help you avoid some fights or start at better positions though. Besides that, insight is quite handy to have too, the same for perception, and also stealth. The other skills don't really matter that much, I'm afraid. And the ones that have this little eye icon here, it's because they aren't used in the main campaign, which is the Crown of the Magister. Now for languages, at least for the main campaign, Old Tirmarian is an amazing pick, and Orcish too. The other ones don't matter much. Well, alright, now that we know the best about character creation, let's talk about some of the unique mechanics in Solasta, especially when it comes to the differences between 3rd edition and Pathfinder. I want to start with advantage and disadvantage. These are very important mechanics. Advantage basically means your character gets to roll 2 d20 dice whenever making any action reliant on them, and pick the best result. It's essentially the same as the Fortune Hex ability from Pathfinder, and well, if you've played that, you know how powerful it can be, because it will highly increase your chances of hitting the enemy, and also making saving throws or avoiding attacks. And the best part is, advantage is pretty commonplace. It's not as restricted as Fortune Hex, which has limited uses. The easiest way of acquiring advantage is attacking from stealth. Besides that, if the enemy is, let's say, stunned, you also get advantage. Some spells like Guiding Bolt can debuff the enemy so that the next attack is made with advantage. And some classes have abilities that grant it, like Barbarian and Reckless Stance. As far as disadvantage, the easiest way is through the dodge action, which can be performed in combat at the cost of your main action, so you can't really attack at the same round outside of some specific class abilities. Ideally, you'll always want to be dodging with your tank, especially on the higher difficulties, especially when surrounded by enemies, because like I said, it will highly reduce the chances of them hitting you. Now, another very important mechanic to understand is concentration, which is unique to 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. I'm not much of a fan of it, but here's how it works. By default, a lot of spells require concentration, like Shield of Faith. if the spell needs it, you can always just check beneath the Properties tab. If it has a concentration tag, then well, it requires concentration, so Banishment does, while Guardian of Faith does not. The problem with concentration is that you can only have but one concentration spell per character on at the same time. Which means if I decide to cast Shield of Faith on my cleric, then I'll get a concentration effect. I will not be able to cast any other concentration spell unless I first lose the effect of the first. So if I was to cast Haste now, I would get the Haste effect but lose the bonus from Shield of Faith. The main issue I have with it is that it's super limiting because the most powerful spells, well, they all require concentration, especially crowd control or lingering spells and buffs. And only being able to have one at the same time, well, to me it's kinda annoying for a caster. Don't forget you can always choose to dismiss any concentration effect you have by clicking on this little circle here to the right of your character's portrait. Whenever you do it, you'll automatically lose concentration, which can help when it comes to dangerous area of effect spells that you don't want your own allies walking into, especially after battle ends. So just do it for everyone. And there we go, the area is now safe to walk again. Now it's also very important to note that Solasta is a low numbers game, right? That is, your characters won't get anywhere near as high stats, all of them, as let's say in Pathfinder or Neverwinter Nights, even Baldur's Gate, where you could get, well, in Pathfinder at least, higher than 100 armor class, 2 hit rolls, and of course damage saving throws too. In Solasta everything is scaled down by a lot. For example, my Battle Cleric Dwarf here has 31 AC, which by the way is an extremely powerful score for this game, capable of tanking almost anything, even on the higher difficulties. Meanwhile, for Pathfinder, it would be considered garbage at best. Even at level 1 your characters can have like 30 AC. Also, your stats will simply not increase past 20, 20 is the cap, which is kinda silly because you can already start with 20 even at level 1. Outside of some special effects like potions which increased my character's strength to 27. Anyways, the only reason I'm saying all of this is so you are well aware of the differences between Solasta and other games you're probably used to. So don't be afraid if your character has low scores in Solasta because it can be useful. 14 to hit, for example, is also amazing. Enemies don't tend to have high AC, not even on the highest difficulties. The same for damage. My main damage here is 1d8 plus 10 plus 2d6, which is super good. But in reality it's not even 40 or 50, which for a game like Pathfinder would be completely underwhelming. With that out of the way, let's now get into the best strategies for Solasta for an easy time. First, you should absolutely abuse stealth as much as you can, because whenever you attack the enemies from stealth first, you'll automatically ambush them, which means a whole free turn for all of your characters. I don't think it needs any saying, an extra turn can highly help change the battle into your favor. Second, as I've explained before, attacking from stealth means attacking with advantage, highly increasing your chances of hitting and getting critical hits. You can have everyone enter stealth by selecting your party and clicking on the cautious icon here. If you're under stealth, you'll also have this little masked icon above your characters. Now let's initiate battle from stealth, ideally with a ranged attack of course, because you don't need to get close to the enemy. You can already see the plus icon next to the attack, which means we'll get advantage from stealth. And there we go. So after you attack, battle will immediately start. And most of the enemies, well, chances are they'll be surprised, as I said before.
I know.
Which means a whole free turn for your characters. Now ideally, what you want to do is have your ranged characters stay at the back, while sending your tank ahead of the enemy. In this case my tank was already detected by attacking. Whenever you attack you have to make a stealth check, not to be detected by the enemy. But in the case it didn't get detected, ideally you would manually stop, stealth, and then move towards the enemies so they wouldn't get close enough, because enemies in Solasta, they all have a cone of vision, right? That spreads, well, from their front. If any of your characters enters one of these red spots, they will automatically be detected, so ideally you want everyone away from the enemies, at least as far as ranged characters, to fully benefit from stealth as long as you can, for that nice advantage. As far as your tank, well, its purpose is to tank, right? So it doesn't matter if the enemies detect them or attack them, that's the entire point. Now, another very easy way of easily handling enemies is through lingering area of effect spells. For example, Spike Growth is the ultimate spell in the whole game despite just being level 2. That's how good it is. The best part about these types of spells is that they will stack with each other. So for example, you can have 3, even 4, your whole party cast multiple Spike Growths stacked on top of each other. Which means whenever the enemies move towards you, they'll instantly melt even on Cataclysm, taking a massive amount of damage by just moving. Sure, they require concentration, so you have to do it on multiple characters, but it's definitely so good as to be worth it, without a doubt. It's not just Spike Growth, there are also other nice spells like this, such as Wall of Fire, but Spike Growth is definitely the ultimate one. To the point where on Cataclysm, the highest difficulty mode, it's the easiest strategy possible. Another very nice tip is making use of verticality. As I explained before, Solasta has different levels, right? It's not just a flat ground. What this means is you have abilities to push the enemy away from you, which can result in them falling down from a high spot, thus taking a nice amount of damage, or most importantly, instantly killing them if you push them away into the void. So they'll fall to their deaths. While any character can just use the shove and push away option, this does require a saving throw, and well, chances are the enemies will most likely make the save, right? Because they are very big bruisers. On the other hand, the Warlock class has the very special Repelling Blast ability, which pushes enemies away from you for free, without a save, while also dealing a nice amount of damage with your blast. It truly is amazing and the easiest way to make enemies fall into their deaths. So you'll probably want at the very least a single Warlock, because it's really fun to instantly kill enemies like this, at least to me. Now, before finishing this guide, I just want to cover how the difficulty modes work in Solasta and what are the best ones to me. To put it simply, the hardest is definitely Cataclysm mode, but I think the difficulty here is very artificial, if you know what I mean. It's quite badly balanced. Like I said, Solasta is a low numbers game. And here's what Cataclysm does. First, it increases the damage you take by 50%, which is very annoying, especially early game. Later it doesn't matter that much, but early on, I mean, your characters will have low hit points, so if the enemy attacks once, they are close to one-shotting you. Second, it completely doubles all of the enemy's hit points score. I don't know what they were thinking with this, it's super annoying, right? Because it essentially turns everything, or at least most enemies, into bullet sponges. For example, the Sorak Warrior enemy here has 64 hit points for a battle done at level 3, and by the way, you fight multiple even at early as level 2 during unskippable story battles, right? I'm not saying it's not doable, it's just, well, to me at least, boring, because it takes forever to kill them, unless you are later relying on cheesy abilities like stacked Spike Growths, which does melt anything. Anyways, I could handle the hit points and the damage increase, but unfortunately it also highly increases the enemy saving throw, which I think is a sin. Like I said, Solasta is all about low numbers. A +3 to the enemy saves is awful. Mind you, my character with 19 wisdom has 14 spell DC. The highest you could get at this point is 15 if you had 20, which for wisdom is impossible. It's extremely hard to increase spell DC in Solasta. As a matter of fact, it only increases by leveling up and your main attribute score. There's no feats, no gear, no nothing that increases it further. At endgame, your character will be looking at something like 17 DC. And for the early parts, let's say you have 14 DC. The enemies all have a +3, which means all they have to do is roll 11 to make the save. Quite easy to do, right? I mean, it's what, 50% almost chance of them always making saving throws, which I think makes playing spellcasters that rely on these spells quite annoying in Cataclysm mode, unless you're going with, let's say, sorcerers, because they can force the enemy to roll with disadvantage on their saves. Lastly, Cataclysm will also increase enemies' attack rolls by a +3, also somewhat annoying but not as much as saving throws because, well, eventually at least you can stack AC or just use the dodge mechanic to avoid hits, or at least attempt to dodge them. Deadlier AI and Merciless AI on the other hand I think are very nice, because they aren't just stat bloats added on top of the enemy. And look, I know games like Pathfinder also have enemies with higher stats, but like I said before, in Pathfinder it's very easy for your own characters to also get high stats, not so much for Solasta. My main issue with Cataclysm is actually random encounters. I'm sorry, but random encounters in Solasta are absolutely unbalanced. I don't know what they were thinking. Some of them, for example, have your level 2 to level 3 party fighting against 10 enemies at once. Like the classic one with 10 bandits. There's also another very annoying one with 4 tiger drakes. And get this, you can be ambushed during these random encounters. There's no way to fully avoid them. Even if you went with an Oblivion cleric, you would only avoid ambushes while sleeping. You can still get them while traveling through the map, and you will. Some are even, I dare say, unwinnable, at least for the early parts of the game. This one I mentioned with the 4 tiger drakes, for example. All of these enemies can fly. They deal around 20 damage on Cataclysm, which is enough to two-shot any character at this point of the game. They also have amazing movement, can freely disengage from your enemies, which means they'll target the backline and then disengage. And they also just happen to have +9 to their attack rolls and higher than 60 hit points each. I'm sorry, but there's just nothing you can do if you get ambushed to defeat these enemies, because they do too much damage, at this point in the game at least. Of course, once you reach around level 5+, stuff tends to get a lot more manageable, especially random encounters wise. But before that, I'm just saying you'll be at the mercy of RNG. The story battles at least are very doable on Cataclysm with proper strategies, but random encounters, no way, they're just way out there. So I definitely wouldn't recommend Cataclysm for Iron Man mode. Now on the other hand, Scavenger mode I find is a way better difficulty option. It does increase the enemy stats, but at a far more manageable level. For example, it doesn't increase the damage you take, their hit points is only increased by 25%, it's not that much of an increase. And as far as saving throws and attack rolls, it's just a +1, which is very doable too, while keeping the very nice Deadlier and Merciless AI options. On the other hand, Authentic mode, which is normal, well, I'd say if it's your first time, go for it, but if you're already experienced with this type of game, Scavenger is certainly doable enough. Now the good thing about Solasta's difficulty options is that just like Cataclysm, you can go for Custom, which lets you then freely change any of these boosts or reduce them at will. For example, for Cataclysm, I would have something like 20% or 25% extra damage, at most, together with way lower enemy health, just around 150%, and definitely no saving throws boosts. I'm sorry, but it's just a bad way of increasing the difficulty, artificially of course. And that's pretty much it. Well friends, so this was it for my first ever Solasta guide. I'll soon be releasing more if there's enough interest, especially building guides, right, for each class in the game. If you found this guide useful as always, please remember to like, subscribe and consider becoming a channel member. Thank you for watching and see you next time, friends.
More coming your way.